I'm going to ask everybody when they come in to please mute your microphone. We are now recording. Welcome to our civility session with Highland Township. I'm really excited to be here and to be with so many people. We have quite a roster tonight. We have 86 people registered. They're not all on yet, but people keep coming in as a steady stream, which is awesome. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a sense of how things are going to go tonight. So I'm Lynn Galadner, and I work with Stephen and Nolan on the Civility Project. And this is going to be an hour-and-a-half long session, so thank you for joining us for such a meaty amount of time. And the way it's going to go is we'll begin with a video from our sponsor in a moment, and then a welcome from Highland Township. And then Stephen and Nolan are going to jump in and talk a little bit about what the Civility Project is, who they are, and what we're trying to do here. And then we'd like to get you guys involved. So it's always more fun when everybody can interact. So we're going to have 2 opportunities tonight to go into breakout rooms. And they will just automatically put you into groups of 5. And you'll go into these rooms that are somewhere in the ether. And we will have a question each time. And so I'll tell you right now, just you can start thinking about it, but we'll repeat it then and we'll have it written for you so it'll pop up in the room that you're in. But the first time that you're in a breakout room, you'll talk about what motivates your political position. So in terms of where you are politically, what is important to you? What are the factors that motivate your vote or your position when it comes to politics? And then in the second breakout room, we'll talk a little bit more personally about what things in your background, your value system, bring you to that place of political position. So some things to think about, and they may be questions that you haven't pondered. So it's a really fun exploration too. And we're looking to do that with each other to have some sense of how we come to our decisions and try to build understanding with one another. Each time we go into the breakout room, you'll have 7 minutes, and then it'll count down. We'll let you know when you have just a minute left, and then you'll all come back in and we'll have a little bit of a discussion, a little sharing about how that was, what that experience was like. We'll go back into the breakout room, come back and do the same, and we will finish with Q&A. So that's how tonight's gonna go. What I would love to do is to start with a little video from our sponsor. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll play that, and I'm hoping that you can hear it, so here it goes.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing, racism is rampant, the pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
All right, thank you to Delta Dental. We are so grateful that they make this Civility Project available to all of you free of charge to the different organizations that want to bring it to their cities, their communities, and their companies as well. So any of you who are here tonight and you like your experience, if you would like to bring us to your faith community, your corporation, any kind of a group, big or small, we would love to hear from you. So you can always put that in the chat, and I will be in touch with you as well as we go through. If you have questions, when you have questions, please add them to the chat and I'll make sure we get to them in chronological order.
Yeah, we do bar mitzvahs, we do Christmas parties.
We do. We're quite
family reunions.
Judy, I'd like to invite you to say a few words from Highland Township before we get going.
Well, good evening, everybody, and we're pretty excited that we have such a great turnout tonight. And we're, of course, very excited that Stephen and Nolan and Lynn have decided to come and join us and maybe learn a little bit more about Highland Township. And in turn, we will definitely learn how to maybe have calm, cool, collected discussions with each other in a time where we've been held down for a while. We've been held down and nobody likes that. So if we weren't a little bit antsy before, we're a lot antsy now. So it's a whole new world, and any skills that we can gain are a step forward for all of us. So thanks again for coming, Stephen and Nolan. We're really excited that you're here and looking forward to a great evening with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Judy. All right, so Stephen and Nolan, I'd like to invite you to start by simply introducing the Civility Project, how it came to be, and the two of you and your vision for this.
Nolan, you want to go first this time?
I could, yeah. I mean, this is something that's been building throughout the dozen or so years of our friendship. And it's these days, an unlikely friendship. I don't know if it would have been as unlikely 25, 30 years ago, but nowadays it's unlikely for people of really drastically different political views to have a sort of fast friendship. And Steve and I started out 12 years ago when he became editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press. I've been editorial page editor of the Detroit News for 20 years. And, Steve came in as a progressive editorial page editor. I'm a conservative. And a lot of people thought, wow, wouldn't it be fun to put them on the TV, put them in front of groups, put them here and there, and let's watch them fight. And so, we did that for a while. And what we found was sort of a unexpected ability to converse, and rather than just scream at each other, to listen to each other. And I think the Civility Project grew out of that. It's not something in the beginning that we made a conscious commitment to. But from the beginning, speaking for myself, I was very interested, even though I didn't agree with him, very interested in what Steve had to say, because I felt like he articulated his views in a very compelling way. First, I think he's the best writer in the state, but I felt like he articulated himself in such a compelling way, an intriguing way. And I always felt like in reading his copy and in having these sort of discussions with him in public forums, that I walked away with a greater understanding of where he was coming from and a greater appreciation of his viewpoints. Now, he didn't change his mind, my mind. I've never changed his mind, but I felt like there was value in every conversation we had. And that's been true from the beginning. And sort of the Civility Project over the years sort of developed out of that. I mean, and to where we are, today.
Yeah. I think it's maybe obvious that in the last maybe 4 or 6 years that the friendship that Nolan and I have, and the ability that we have because of that friendship to be able to talk really frankly with each other about things we disagree about, to be able to have arguments and debates without it sort of devolving into non-productive name calling or other kinds of argumentative forms of discussion. It's just become even rarer, and it's become even harder, I think, to build those kinds of relationships. I mean, if you think about how polarized people have become, if you think of how polarized politics have become in the last half decade or so, I mean, I don't think any of us could have predicted, that things would be quite the way they are. And so I think as everything has kind of changed around us, it became more and more evident to Nolan and I that the relationship we had was unusual, and that the things about that relationship that work, and the things that make it work, are worth sharing, are worth trying to get other people to understand, so that they could be able to do the same things. and this really kind of crystallized for me, this idea of the Civility Project kind of crystallized after Nolan and I went and recorded a conversation between the two of us for a project called StoryCorps, which is a national public radio project that travels around the country and gives people an opportunity to tell stories about themselves and their families and people who are close to them. And they archive all the stories, and it's kind of a cool thing that you can go online and listen to stories from all over the country. And so they came to Detroit and parked a little Winnebago on the front lawn of the DIA and invited people to come down and spend an hour talking with somebody close to them about their relationship. And I think most people immediately thought about family members or spouses. I decided I was going to take Nolan with me. And so we went down there, and I told him that we were going so that we could have a conversation not about what we normally talk about, not about politics or the things that we disagree on, but I wanted us to talk about where our points of view on those things come from. Like, who are we that brings us to these really opposite viewpoints. I wanted us to talk about how we grew up. I wanted us to talk about how we got introduced to the idea of politics and debate and things like that. And the idea in my mind was that this would make us understand each other better. It would make us see even further past our political differences, and to really understand that the person that you might be arguing with, the person who might even be making you mad with the stuff that they're saying, is a whole lot more than the sum of those political views. And so after we did that, and I think both came out of it knowing more about each other than we had before, I think we really started to think about the value of that and whether that could be replicated with other people to be able to bring them to the same space. And so we started sort of thinking this out as more of a project. And that's really what we've been trying to do, is get people to think about how to get beyond disagreement, how to get beyond kind of simple political understandings of each other, and really start to know people who you don't agree with, so that their politics and your disagreements don't come to define the entire relationship.
And what we come out of this with, Lynn, was an understanding that the people who disagree with you, who hold opposite views from you, aren't evil, they're not ignorant, they're not poorly motivated. And that's where we are today. You know, we think the people who don't hold our same view, there's something wrong with them. They hate the country. I heard the president say that the other day. Democrats hate the country. They don't hate the country. They may be wrong, but they don't hate the country. And this idea that this sort of superior idea, whether it's on the right or it's on the left, that you are the only one who talks to God. You know, most people, what Steve and I learned in talking to each other and learning about each other's experiences and values, is that everybody comes to their opinions in the same way. Most people do. They take the facts and do an honest assessment of those facts and apply their own experiences, their own concerns, their own values to them, and they come up with an opinion. And if their opinion is different than yours, it's because of those values, experiences, personal concerns. It's not, there's nothing sinister about that. When we get to that point, then we can start to build, better trust, a more positive conversation.
I think that's really smart. And I always take notes. I've done this with you so many times, and I learn new things every time, because there's just different ways to look at things. And so I know that when you guys created the Civility Project, you had this vision of in-person events, You had this beautiful program of, some people meeting ahead of time to have a conversation with someone they didn't know who had different opinions or stances. And then at the event, you'd invite them to share how that conversation went and, what unfolded. And then, of course, we were hit with a pandemic. And so at first we panicked, and then we said, why don't we try Zoom? And now it's like explosive because we've had so many programs on Zoom, which has been really fun. And we've actually probably reached many more people than we would have if it had to be in person. Maybe people can tune in if they couldn't come in person. So there's always silver
We're going
lining.
to be back in person soon.
We
will
hope to be,
back in
yes.
person soon.
We can't wait for that, definitely. So anyway, I wanted to ask you guys to sort of, we have about 10-ish minutes to still just talk a little bit about how we build civility before we try to invite some people to interact. And I wanted to ask you to present, how do we build civility? So in general, you were talking about this when you have different politics or different opinions. Then we were looking at civility in a time of crisis, when we have really scary things going on and people have different fears and different experiences related to the pandemic. And we're in an election year, a presidential election year. So everything is heightened. So there's lots of ways that we could be divided. How do you go about building civility, and why would you want to?
So I think we've as we've kind of put this project together and started having these sessions, I think we've sort of come to agreement on some pretty basic principles about how to engage in a civil disagreement and how to avoid the kinds of really the animosity and antipathy that attends so many political discussions. And so one of them, I think, is the art of listening and the act of listening. And I think we all believe that we are good listeners. We all believe that we're as good at listening as we are at talking. And I think the truth is that for many of us, that's not true. For a lot of us, listening is simply defined as not talking, right? If you're talking and I'm not, then I'm listening. But I think there's a little more to it than that. I think there is a more deliberate and intentional activity that you're trying to engage in. You are really trying to understand what the other person is saying. And in addition to not talking, I think you are not sitting and thinking about what you're going to say next. I catch myself doing this a lot. You're listening to someone else, but in the back of your mind, you're saying, well, here's what I'm going to say back as soon as that person stops talking. That's not the kind of listening that I think moves you to the space where you're really understanding what the other person is saying and really placing some value on what that person is saying, even if you strenuously disagree. The other principle that I think is really important is the commitment to the idea that that the exchange you're having doesn't define the entire relationship and never brings you to the space where you say, well, I'm done with this. I'm done with this person. I'm done with this argument. I don't want to speak to that person anymore. Nolan and I really get into it when we have arguments. I mean, there are times when we are really on deeply opposite sides and when the conversation between us becomes quite heated. But neither one of us ever gets up from the conversation at the end and says, well, that's it. I'm finished with this. I'm not going to engage with that person again. There again, there's a deliberate and intentional act to say, it's okay that we disagree. It's okay that we disagree strongly. And it's even okay to disagree to the point where we decide we can't talk about something anymore because there's no more productive use in the argument. But we always come back to one another to talk more, to be able to learn more and to hear more about the other side of the argument. I think that's a terribly important principle of civility. The other thing that I think becomes a critical part of that civility is this exercise that we have been asking people to go through, where you do make an effort to learn a lot more about somebody than just what their political views are. It is a really different experience to have a passionate argument with somebody who you know and actually respect, because you know more about them, than it is to do that with somebody who you don't know and who you can more easily disrespect. There's so much in our culture right now that puts a premium on that kind of disrespect and dismissal that we see when people have arguments. If you think about social media, the way it encourages really uncivil behavior. If you think about the 24-hour news cycle that we live in, cable news, I think it thrives on this idea of dehumanizing and debasing people who have different views. I think the antidote to that is this idea of actually knowing the people that you're talking about beyond the conversation that you're having where you disagree. And like Nolan said, that's not something that happens the first time you sit down with somebody. It can't. You have to actually build the relationship to be able to get to that space. And you start by really trying to get to know someone and really trying to understand what their experiences are and how they come to these ideas that you may find wrong or offensive, or even just not very smart. I mean, that's all okay. The question is, what value do you place on the person who holds those views? And that brings you to a space, I think, where it's a whole lot easier to be civil.
Yeah, I will agree with that. And to Jude's question that she posted earlier, I mean, on how you get to that point. Well, before you sit down and have those, as Steve just said, those really meaty, difficult conversations, learn about each other and build that trust, but also approach the conversation with an honest heart. What's your goal? What's your goal in the conversation? If you're out to win, you might as well not have the conversation. If you're out to convert, you might as well just, not talk. I never think going into a debate with Steve that I'm going to convert him. I'm never going to bring him into the light. But my goal is not to win the argument, not to convert Steve, but to learn something from him, to challenge my own position and help me hone and refine my own position. I always start with the idea in the back of my head, I may be wrong. And I'm listening for the things in his argument that might prove me wrong. And I think you have to go in, you have to lose your smugness, lose your self-righteousness. And no matter who you're talking about, ask yourself, what can I learn here?
I appreciate that, because Jude asked in the chat, what builds the trust between the two of you so that you can engage and disagree, as you mentioned. And you had said earlier, Nolan, like in the beginning, when you guys started your engagement, it was sort of, let's watch them fight. So how did that feel? I mean, was that, or did you guys just sort of rise above it?
I saw that question. I thought it was a good one. And, Steve was my rebound relationship, if you will. I had been paired before with people, and in particular, a person who came into every discussion trying to do a gotcha. How can I make him look foolish? How can I embarrass him? And I never got that feeling with Steve. And so it helped us build a comfort level and a trust that, I feel we can discuss anything. And Steve's not going to say, gotcha, there's room to make mistakes. There's room for us to say the wrong thing to each other and then correct it and move on.
I'd like to ask one question before we go into our breakout rooms, and then we will do Q&A at the end. So please, if you already have questions brewing, put them in the chat and we will get to them after the breakout rooms. But, you know, I think a lot of people right now on all sides of all issues feel a little sense of despair. You know, like, how can I possibly bridge this divide? How could, you know, I don't even understand where the other person's coming from. They don't understand where I'm coming from. How are we ever going to find our way back to some semblance of, you know, dignity or mutual respect? And so what would you guys say to those people, myself included, who feel a sense of despair that, you know, yes, we're all Americans, but we feel like we're really very divided right now? Any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, we are really divided right now. And we're divided over things that that actually don't have really easy answers. No matter which side of the arguments you find yourself on, there isn't, you know, a switch you can flip or suggest that gets flipped that fixes this for everyone. And you know, frankly, I think the first step is kind of acknowledging that, this is difficult stuff. This is fundamental stuff that in a lot of cases we're arguing and discussing, and it's going to take time to figure out what to do about it. And it's not just that it's going to take time as a country to figure these things out. I think we got to be able to give ourselves permission to take the time to think about these things before we decide what the right answer or the right solution is. And again, there are a lot of cultural forces right now that argue against that, right? Social media asks you to have an opinion and the right opinion right away, you know, instantly.
And you're stuck with it forever.
Right, and it's there forever. You can't change it. You can't get rid of it. I think resisting that as much as you can is a terribly important dynamic to indulge right now. There is no way to be able to sort through all of this instantly and come up with, you know, the right sort of pithy solution all the time. And so giving yourself the permission to say, I actually don't know what to do about that. I don't know everything that I think about that. And I'm going to sit and think for a while and maybe be quiet while I figure it out. It takes some doing right now, I think, to do that. You know, I also have been encouraging lots of people to right now, especially, try to reach out beyond your sort of zone of familiarity or comfort on the subjects that we're talking about. All of us grow up in this country because of its history, not knowing as much about other people's experiences, people who are different from us, as we should. And part of, and this is not everything that's gone wrong, but a big part of what's gone wrong is not knowing enough about each other. And right now it's harder to do this because, you know, we're being told to stay apart and not to physically engage with people. But it's super important to be able to think through ways in which you can, you know, expand your exposure to other people's lives and experiences, and to really try to understand where they're coming from. That was one of the things that I thought when Nolan and I went and did StoryCorps was really important. Hearing how he grew up, where he grew up, and what kinds of things he experienced, and him doing the same with me, I think really gave us perspective that we didn't have before that, and it gave us understanding that we couldn't have had before that. And so I think doing those things right now is just at a real premium in order to be able to manage all this intellectually and not lose your mind, really, because again, this is very tough stuff, and the stakes are just so incredibly high in terms of what we end up doing or changing.
The other thing is this idea of a permanent record, and which is sort of enhanced by the internet and social media and what have you. This notion that how you felt, an opinion expressed 20 years ago could come back and bite you in the ass today. I mean, I look at things I wrote 20 years ago and I say, oh man, 2 decades of life experiences and meeting and talking to different people, learning different things and being in a different place in life. I probably wouldn't write that today. I don't feel that today. There are opinions I held a year ago I don't hold today. I think we've got to give people room to evolve and grow in their opinions. And I saw a Cato poll the other day. 65% of Americans are afraid to express their political views today. You tell me how we get through anything in this country if 2/3 of the nation, 2/3 of Americans are afraid to talk to each other.
Really good point. So that's a perfect segue to have people talk to each other. And so I'm going to create breakout rooms, and it will automatically put you into it. If you leave the breakout room, you will come back and join me and Stephen and Nolan, which we will be happy to have you, but you may want to stay in your breakout room and have your individual conversations. So the question, which I will then post to all the rooms once you're in there, is what motivates your political position? So thinking about where you are politically, what is important to you, and what motivates your vote or your position. So we're going to have about 7 minutes in the breakout room, which goes by pretty quickly. So I encourage you to introduce yourselves briefly, make sure everybody has time to talk. We get excited and we want to all share what we have to say. So if you could give everybody a little bit of a chance when we come back, we'd love to hear how that went. And all the great questions that are in the chat, we will get to as soon as we're done with our breakout rooms. So let's see what happens now. So I'm going to put you in there, and Stephen and Nolan, you may be thrown into a room. I'm not sure. Feel free to come back here if you do. So here we go, guys. Good luck.
Yeah, this is the first time we've done that.
So I see a few people here. Are you guys not in rooms? I think Nolan went to a room, yes. All right, so Nolan's in a room, and I think I see 2 people are not. And so, yeah, we have 2 people who haven't joined rooms. So feel free to hang out a little, Stephen, until they come back.
That's really interesting. So how did they divide them? Did somebody do that before?
No, I just did it because you have to know how many people there are. And so I say, how many rooms I want to divide them into. And so it'll tell me how many people per room. And then I will, I wanted 4 to 5 in a room. So I went down to, it just depends how many you have total. And then you can broadcast a message to all, and it just hovers there. And so that's the question that we want them to talk about.
That's pretty cool. I've not seen that before.
It's really fun. And then I was part of a Seth Godin program with like 2,000 people in it, and they did breakout rooms of 4 to 5 people.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I had done it, and it'll tell you the room is closing in 1 minute. So I just clicked, leave room, And all of a sudden it was me with like the presenters, and I'm like, oh, hi. You know, like I didn't mean to do that, because it just sends you back in about a minute after it tells you it's closing. So you don't have to really do anything, but anyway, yes. So, all right. So we have about 5 minutes, okay? I will be right back. We're coming back in, Stephen, just so you know. So they have 42 seconds. And they'll be popped back in.
So then at the end, it just kicks them back, or
Yep.
do they come back? Yeah.
They can come back, and you'll start to see people come in. It's counting down for me. You can't see that, can you? Because I made you guys co-host. Think you could.
I
Yeah.
don't see it.
No? Okay, so it's just me. But yeah, it says 18 seconds. And then they're all just going to be like, hello, hello, you know, like the Muppets, like that.
Where does it say all of that?
It's there's a Breakout Rooms button at the bottom, and then it's a little pop-up window. It shows me who's in what room and all of that.
Oh, look at that. That's very cool.
Cool. Feel so tech savvy, right?
Oh,
Everybody, I'm
okay.
gonna ask you guys to mute your microphones if you don't mind, as you come back in and we all get to join again.
Okay.
So how cool was that, right?
Yeah.
I think so. I just feel so tech savvy. What can I say?
Too short.
So I want to ask you guys, as everyone's coming back in now, I'd love to hear what the experience was like. And I'm sure lots of people.
Lynn, your mic is.
You went mute.
Yeah.
All right,
There you
sorry.
go.
I was trying to mute you guys and I muted myself. So sorry. So just mute your microphone until it's your turn. But if you'd like to share, maybe one representative from each group can share a little bit about what it was like. You could, there's a little hand raising option at the bottom. It should be on the corner of your screen, or you can raise your hand. So if you could do that, let me know if you want to say something. We'd really love to hear how it went and what the conversations were like. Who might like to start?
This is Tom Landry. We were in group 8,
Okay.
and my wife and I were just talking that one of the things when you're doing something like this, you're a little hesitant to express views right now because you don't know anybody. So it's a little awkward. The more you talk, the more you get commonality with someone. But I think there's a hesitancy at the beginning to, and Nolan kind of prompted us a little bit at the end to get more into what your views are. So thank
Cool.
you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tom.
And Lynn, I listened in on this group, and one of the things that struck me is something Tom talked about, as about how he started at one place on the political spectrum as a young man. And as he lived and gained experiences that impacted his viewpoints, he ended up on a whole nother point on the political spectrum. I think that's what we have to understand about people, is that there is change. And that change is almost entirely influenced by our experiences.
Absolutely. So I have a couple of hands raised. Sue Trujillo, is that your name? I'm sorry if I'm hacking it. Would you like to go?
Sure. I was in group 6,
Okay.
and like Tom expressed, there was a little bit of hesitancy, and we didn't really even get into like what our political views really were. We just talked about the issues of, what motivates us without really revealing what our political views are. And there was a lot of similar interests. One person in our group we didn't hear from. They just chose to be silent, which is fine. And then, but all three of us, we kind of, we had a lot in common. We found out we had a lot in common, even not knowing, what our views are.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. Thank you for sharing your experience. I appreciate that. Brianne Stewart, would you like to go?
Sure, absolutely. So we were,
Oop.
and
Are you there?
can you hear me?
We
Yep.
can. Go for it.
Awesome. So we were in group 9, and I'd say that right away we kind of connected, and we wanted about 20 more minutes with one another.
Time, I promise. We have another one of these.
And we found, I feel like we built empathy right away. We're all so different, and we know that and accept that and want to learn more about each other. And it was really interesting to just hear that doesn't matter to us where we came from, who we are, what we believe. We just want good for humanity. And that's where we were in this subject. And it was really kind of a nice starting point. And I'm hoping that we can get back into the same group for the next subject.
You will, I promise.
And Lynn, if I can say something here, Brianne, that brings me to something Steve said early on in our discussion that I thought was, or, you know, in our relationship that I thought was so present, that he and I, and most people, I think, share the common outcome, the common goal for an outcome. We want to end up in the same place. We want good things for our community, for our families, for our country. We have different ideas about how to get there, but that place where we want to be in the end is very similar. And, you know, I think you expressed that very well.
Thank you. And I wholeheartedly agree. So I'm glad I was able to articulate that.
So much. Would anybody else like to share their experience from their group before I send you all back?
I think from a procedural point of view, what I was sort of frustrated with was in the sense of I enjoyed hearing everybody's viewpoint. I wanted to get into a discussion, but we didn't have time.
Right. It's amazing how the time just sort of fritters away, and we could probably spend the whole session just getting into these conversations. And I think that's Stephen and Nolan's point, is that when you start to get to know the person behind the viewpoint, that's where we make progress and we actually have a chance to build bridges. So without further ado, let's go back to the rooms. Let's take 10 or 12 minutes. We'll have more time. It'll still feel like nothing, and then we'll come back and then we'll jump into questions. Sound good? Yeah.
Is it the same question?
No, the question now, which I will broadcast, is what things in your background, value system, or history bring you to your views? Sound good? All right. Everybody's in their rooms except for our two holdouts and us. So I think we have at least until 8 o'clock. So if you want to
Oh, really? Okay.
stretch your legs, yeah, we'll be good. Welcome back as you guys trickle in. Nice to see you.
And not be negative. Whoops.
Sure, everybody's back. Welcome, welcome. I'm sorry it couldn't be longer. I'm sure you wanted to go much deeper. Please mute your microphone if you don't mind. And then I'd love to hear how this round went. If you got deeper into the conversation, if you felt really started to uncover some great nuggets. Who would like to share?
Just pick on somebody, Lynn.
That's not very civil, Nolan.
Well, this is Tom Landry. I think what happened is because we've already had a chance to talk previously, we opened up a bit more on this round. Nolan kind of helped prompt us a little bit, but I think we all felt a little more at ease in terms of opening up and sharing a bit more than, and we had a little more time this time too to express where our views come from and how they've changed a little bit over time too. And we were able to talk a little bit about religion and the impact that may have had on us and on the next generation coming.
Can you tell us more about that, Tom? I'd love to hear a little bit more about how people felt their faith factored into their views.
Well, I'll speak for my wife and I. We both came from families where religion was important and part of our upbringing. And
we met at a Catholic college.
Yeah, and that helped form some of our early beliefs and some of the values that, a lot of the values have stayed with us throughout life. But at the same time, as our kids have grown and our grandkids, they've gone their own way, have their own religion. What they see are the values that we have, not so much the values of religion has. And one of the things that we felt was important, it's not what we say, it's what we do that teaches them.
And that there's value in all religions.
Yep.
And Lynn, all of us in the room were of a certain age, and talking about the similarities between what we're witnessing today and the turmoil and what's going on in the streets had a very familiar feel to what was going on when we were growing up, when we were teenagers and young, college students. We're not, it's not so much different. We've been here before as Americans. Very similar feel.
I see a comment from Bridget. She said, our group was very interesting. We started slow, but picked up as we built trust. Conversation could have easily continued. Well, that's great to hear. That's wonderful. Who else would like to share a little bit about their experience in their group?
Kathy.
Oh, Ray.
What, you want me to say?
Yeah, okay.
The interesting thing was that there was a lot of similarities at the time we grew up, how we were raised,
Values.
and the values and everything else, and the neighborhood. Being able to know all your neighbors. If you needed coffee, tea, whatever you want, you could get it from your neighbors. It was a great time. And the other thing, what was great about it, many of us didn't have a lot of money. So you had to be creative as kids to find ways of making some money so that you get the pop and chip or candy. But I would never trade for the time that I was born, where I grew up, the parents that I had and the brothers I had, and the community.
Interesting.
But the greatest impact was college on me.
Okay. Just that helped shape your values, your viewpoints.
Oh, absolutely. Because in the 60s, I saw the beginning of the liberal element taking over the colleges.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Who else? Yes, Marilyn, would you like to unmute and share with us?
Yeah, I'm not seeing the hand this time. I think that one reason why my experience of our group is very good is that because we all showed up for this forum, it's like we all stipulated that we're people who are reasonably willing to talk. We did have different viewpoints, but if we mentioned that, sometimes we live next door to people that have radically different views, or they're even in our own family that have different views. And then you just have to say, I think we're going to agree to disagree here. But one of the things that worked about this group was we were all respectful of one another because we started out by stipulating to that. And I wonder if we're just going to have to do that in more places than just here.
It's a really good point. And somebody has to start it. And so this is a pretty sizable group to be able to go out there and in your circles say, I'm willing to have these conversations. Will you join me? I think when you're face to face with people, it's harder to say no and shut them down than when you're on social media or at a distance. I know Sue mentioned in the comments that their group wished there were more young people, teens or 20s, in this conversation. And that's definitely something that would be lovely. We should think about that, Stephen and Nolan, how we can bring this program to younger people, although we are bringing it to some college campuses this fall.
Yes.
And then Jenny and Bailey said, I also had the thought about the innate civility in a civility process. Would you care to explain that? I'm not sure I'm following. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I believe Marilyn told me if I didn't interpret this right, but there is sort of a innate civility in showing up for a civility project. If you show up for a civility project, you are probably very interested in being civil. That's why you showed up.
Sure.
And you probably are already a little civil in that case. Can people hear us okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. We were having issues earlier. And it's hard to the person who shows up to a civility project is probably one of the people who least need the civility project. Which I think it's still very important to reach across the aisle and talk to people about all manners of things, but there's sort of this weird innate togetherness that we do actually all share.
Yes.
Although, Jenny, I would say this, and what we've experienced in the groups we've done.
I'm Bailey, but hi. But that's
I'm
fine.
sorry, Bailey, I just took a stab.
50-50.
Is that a lot of people who show up for these sessions still, approach conversations and approach this, this process with a certain smugness, a certain self-righteousness, that they're right and the people that they're going to engage with are wrong. And how do we convince them that they're wrong? We get that question all the time. And that is sort of anathema to civility. You've got to approach this with the idea, with an honest heart, that that person feels they're just as right as you are. And what can you learn from each other? What understanding can you gain from each other? And how can you use that understanding to get to a consensus? Because it's where we need to get in all levels of our life and in our country, is to some sort of consensus about how we're going to solve problems. Because we have very serious problems here.
That's really true.
Quickly also speaking about the youngness, I find it very hard to approach conversations in good faith anymore. I think partially because I was raised with social media and I was inundated with people who were arguing in bad faith a lot, and still am. But that makes it very hard to go on social media and try and have a nice conversation with someone about a news article, because it's hard to approach that with good faith anymore for me.
It's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that, Bailey. Stephen and Nolan, and after this question, maybe I think we should spend a little time getting to the questions in the chat, because you guys have sent some really good ones that I want to tackle before we're done. But you guys have talked in past sessions about social media and its role in civility or incivility. So maybe this would be a good time to touch on that really quickly.
Well, I mean, it's the final circle of hell, in my opinion. It is the biggest enemy to civility. It provides a shield, almost an anonymity that enables people to be at their worst, to say things they wouldn't say in a face-to-face setting, they wouldn't say if they were sitting down at a typewriter and typing it out. It's been an enabler of hate, of bigotry, of racism, of misogyny, of every bad thing in our society.
Stephen, would you like to follow that with anything?
Yeah, no, I'm also really concerned about the effect of social media on, on other kinds of discourse, that it's not just confined to social media, but social media now kind of defines the ways that we interact with each other, in some cases in the real world. I will just put in a small historical plug. I'm a huge student of history, and media in this country has had many different iterations, and there have been many different technological influences that have really changed media. The telegraph, for instance, really just changed the face of communication in this country. Radio, television. If you go back to the infancy of all of those technologies, you find very much the same kinds of dynamics that we see on social media. Now, those are not interactive mediums, all of them, and so they are a little different. But the telegraph was used to spread incredible lies when it was developed. Much of the run-up to the Civil War is full of fake telegrams being sent about what was going on in Washington and in Congress. Think about radio when it started, and how nonsensical so much of radio was, and content on radio was. And so I say that to say we are in the very first generation of social media. We're in the infancy of social media, and it is really bad right now. It is an immature platform, but it'll grow up, and it will get better over time. And so I always sort of caution against completely disengaging from it, but I do think we've got to engage differently on it. And the more people who can engage on social media in ways that reflect other media and other forms of communication, the quicker that growing up will happen. So it's not that I think social media is not awful. It's that I think it's a small child, and we've got to shepherd it through some adolescence and then into adulthood.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Jenny and Bailey commented that Morse, the creator of the telegraph, was not a big fan of his invention, from what they understand.
Right.
And Marilyn said, thank you to the legitimate newspapers that print balanced articles that include pros and cons, or something like supporters say this and critics say that. Everyone should subscribe to papers because we need real journalism and not so much social opinion media. I agree with that for sure.
Morse was also an ancestor of mine.
Ah, interesting. All one degree separation. So Teal said it's incredibly difficult to have nuanced conversations via social media. Talking face-to-face allows for these conversations to be much more productive and effective. Very true. And there were some other comments about wanting more time in breakout sessions, and that Jude said a lack of diversity in Highland shapes people's experiences, and that came up in their group discussion. And they also talked about the impact of unions in shaping views.
Well, Lynn, I'd like to address one of those points. I mean,
sure.
People I think sometimes forget or don't notice or pretend not to just how segregated this community is. I was born and spent part of my childhood in Southern Kentucky, small town, 60s South, lots of racism, lots of obvious segregation. But every day I saw Black people and interacted with Black people. Came up here and moved to a working class suburb of Western Wayne County, my family did, and never saw a Black person.
Interesting, and that shapes your views, doesn't it? Because of the difference.
Bound to, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, and I would add to that, one of the things that we need to talk about is the intentionality of that segregation. that this didn't happen on accident. There was policy at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level that created these separate communities. In order to change those things, we have to be as intentional. It is not something that can be undone without, I think, a kind of structured response to that history.
Really good point. Let's get to some questions because I think we could be here all night, which would be a lot of fun and lovely, but I'm sure people will get tired of all this Zoom. So Debbie asked a while ago that she feels so many people just want to win. It seems defeating to try and get to know them. Any thoughts about this desire to win the argument as opposed to have a different approach to the conversation, Stephen or Nolan?
Well, I mean, I think one of the most effective tools when you're in a difficult situation like that is, and you know that somebody's not going to listen to you, ask questions, soften up the conversation, soften up the interaction by asking questions. People love to talk about themselves. Ask questions about those people and try to ease into a more comfortable conversation in which you truly can. It's the only idea I have.
Stephen, anything?
I mean, I think Nolan's right. You've got to approach these things really carefully and intentionally. And so much of what we do is quite impulsive and reckless. And you're rewarded for that right now. You're really encouraged in many different spaces to misbehave or to underthink things, and I think you have to push back against that consistently. You got to think all the time about the way to be more thoughtful about what you're doing and saying.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So Marilyn asked a question. She said, doesn't our culture glorify having an opinion and sticking to it? The quote unquote courage of our convictions idea is seen to be strength, and changing your mind is derided as flip-flopping. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, that's a pet peeve of mine. As someone whose opinion has changed over the last 20 years that I've been in the opinion business, and, you know, God forbid it hadn't changed. I think all of us should change in one direction or the other over the course of a lifetime, or else what's the point of living? But we went through a period in this country where assertiveness became sort of valued, and where getting in each other's faces was sort of encouraged and considered an admirable thing, standing up for yourself. And, you know, to a certain extent, that's good, but there's also a very obnoxious element or potential to that is heightened by the social media. And, you know, I think sometime demure is not a bad thing, to not be so assertive and I've got a right, you know, to be more accommodating, if you will, might diffuse and might help us build better relationship. The things I see going on in public where people, I'm not going to wear a mask, or I'm not going to do this, or, you know, it's just, you know, you've got rights, yes, but other people have rights too. Let's respect each other.
Mm-hmm. Stephen, any thoughts?
Yeah, a few years ago, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a really wonderful writer and thinker, who had been super active on Twitter and had used Twitter in a different way than a lot of people. I mean, he used it kind of as an experimental kind of laboratory. I mean, he would put ideas out there that he hadn't fully formed, and was willing to say, you know, well, I thought that, but now I've seen all this kind of feedback, and I've changed my mind, or I've thought a little differently about that. And he quit Twitter because he couldn't do that there. I mean, the culture of Twitter demanded that everything he said he would be willing to defend almost to the death, and he just got tired of that approach. And I thought it was really interesting when he quit. I thought he would be back, and he hasn't been. I mean, he's not on it even today. And I've known a number of people over time who've decided to quit and walk away from it because of the same kind of dynamic. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think, again, what will grow the medium up is more people who approach it that way, not fewer. More people who want to be thoughtful. And so again, I just encourage people to try to use these tools in a different way than it seems that we're being asked to use them. You know, Twitter, the likes and the retweets, the likes on Facebook are what drive a lot of the behavior. And what gets you likes is outrageousness, rather than being contemplative. But the way to change that is for more people, I think, to be thinking and deliberate about what they say, and willing to say, hey, this is just a thought. This is just an idea. It's not necessarily something I've sworn a blood oath to believe the rest of my life. It's an idea that I'm willing to debate and talk about and change over time.
Thank you. So we have another question. Do you feel that our colleges and universities promote free exchange of thoughts and ideas? It seems that people have been fired recently for expressing views.
Yeah, not anymore. And I think that's a very disturbing trend. My colleague Ingrid Jock had a piece today about groupthink and this pressure for everybody to think alike. Colleges should be the place where ideas are put on the table and debated, and nothing should be off limits. And there should be a diversity of thought and a diversity of conversation. And this idea that if you don't say exactly the right thing, you're gone. I saw somebody saying I'm exhausted by being careful about what I say. Yeah, we're all tired of walking around on eggshells. It is productive and beneficial to our society to have dissented opinions, no matter how offensive you might think they are, brought to the surface and debated and discredited when necessary, but at least debated and viewed and examined. You drive those dissenting opinions underground and they fester and they become something very unsavory and sinister.
I mean, I think there's no question that the idea of a college campus is to have diversity, not just of the people there, but also of points of view. I guess I would disagree with the framing, though, here of the question. College campuses were never that, because 2 centuries, they were the provenance of privileged white men for the most part, but also just no one else of any kind of other ethnic background. And a lot of what we're seeing on college campuses today, the arguments that we're seeing about freedom of expression and whose opinion should count, is about a backlash to the expansion of the franchise of college campuses to include people from other backgrounds. Now, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to figure out how to draw those boundaries so that nobody feels like their point of view is being suppressed. But we spent a long time in this country absolutely and unequivocally suppressing the views of everybody but a very few privileged people by excluding everyone else from those campuses. And by the way, we're still having that argument. I started school at the University of Michigan in 1988. It was the year that the largest percentage of the freshmen or of the students on campus were non-white. There were 8% of the student body then was African American. The entire minority percentage was somewhere around 13 to 15%, looked a lot more like the state and America than it did before. Today, the African American percentage on campus is under 4%. We're going backwards. It is a much less diverse place than it used to be, and the idea that somehow this 4% of the population is oppressing or suppressing the views of the other 96% is one of the more kind of preposterous ideas out there. We're not moving in the right direction in higher ed in this state, while of course other states have lapped us the way that they do with almost every education indicator.
So there's a particularly explosive question I'm going to put to you in a moment. And there are many more in the chat. I know that we're bumping up against our end time, and people are welcome to stay a few minutes longer. I don't want to keep Stephen and Nolan too long, but I thought I'll pose this question, and then if each of you would like to offer some final thoughts, and then if you want to stick around and answer some last questions, we can. And we do thank everybody for being here, and thank Delta Dental for sponsoring and Highland Township for organizing this beautiful session. This has been great, and I do feel like we could go on for hours. So there were a couple of questions that different people posed about whether to avoid or engage or how to respond when someone disagrees with you in extreme ways, like, for example, saying the virus is a hoax or systemic racism doesn't exist anymore. You know, is there a benefit in engaging in that conversation or staying silent? If you do stay silent, are you being complicit? So how do we deal with either hateful or non-factual content or these extreme views in ways that maybe can lead us to civility, or should we not even try? So.
Well, I think there's always value in trying, and there's always value in trying to do so civilly. But you got to judge the situation and what the stakes are for you. How much does it matter to you that that person thinks the way they did? Because again, you're not going to convert that person. Is there room there for a conversation to figure out why they think the way they do, and for you to be able to express why you think the things you think? If not, walk away. There's no compulsion here to engage with people who are unengageable.
Yeah, I think that there are times and there are circumstances where you just cannot have a reasonable conversation with people. And I think most people are pretty skilled at identifying those situations and saying, you know, I can't do this. But, you know, I mean, Nolan always cautions against putting too many people in that category too. Often I think we say that about someone when we really just don't agree with what they're saying and don't want to listen. You know, I think the benefit of the doubt is pretty important when you're thinking about things like this, and the benefit of the doubt in terms of intent is just as important as the benefit of the doubt in terms of substance. You know, assuming that somebody is saying something that might be offensive because they're trying to offend gets you into a situation where you can't have a dialogue with that person. A lot of times it's that person doesn't really understand where you're coming from, doesn't know a lot about the subject that you're talking about, and maybe is trying to engage to get more understanding and more knowledge. And so not dismissing people so easily is I think one of the really important principles here. And sometimes that's hard because people do say things that wound or insult, but I think you give people as many chances as you can before you decide that you're just going to have to walk away.
So as we close our session, Stephen and Nolan and our friends in Highland Township, would you like to leave any parting words on where people can take all of these ideas in the next steps so that we can go out there and start building some civility?
You know, I guess, you know, we've said about what we set out to say, but I would just leave it with this. Start with yourself. Who do you want to be? If you're out there on social media typing things that are explosive, offensive, is that really who you are? Is that really who you want to be? I mean, start with yourself. Am I being as open in my mind, in my heart as I need to be? And, go from there.
Yeah, I would second that.
Jude or Judy or Peter, would you like to, or Tammy, would you like to say any last words?
Well, this is Peter, and I'd say this was very good. It was a great start. I hope we do more. It was terrific putting this together, and I saw Stephen and Nolan at that SOAR meeting, and that's how we got started on this thing. And I'm just, it's the desire there is to have more conversations with people, frankly, and getting to know why they think the way they do. That's very important to me. But this is a great start. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. I've put my email in the chat. It's also at our website, which is greatlakescivilityproject.com. If you'd like to bring this to your community, your group, your workplace, I can make that happen. So thank you, Stephen and Nolan. Thank you, everyone. This was a wonderful session, and we're so grateful. Have a good night.
Thank you all.